John McMullen time. 97.3 ESPN, Eagles Insider. Longtime NFL and NBA columnist. Don't forget it. SB Nation Radio, Fox Sports Radio. He's the man. That's why we have him on every day at 4 p.m. Get us all up to speed and informed on everything and anything Philadelphia Eagles. Let's bring him in now. John McMullen, what's going on? How are you? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you, Ryan. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. You as well. It's just you and me today, man. We're gonna have some fun.
It's pretty exciting, I think.
I can hear it in your voice.
I'm always excited.
I know you are. That's why we love you. First of all, before we dive into some Eagles stuff, I like talking NBA with you when we get the chance to. So, NBA Finals, it's over. There's a lot of storylines, free agency, the injuries. The Philly guy, Kyle Lowry, maybe a redemption story, a somewhat of a big finals, a big first quarter last night. Kawhi, everything that happened in San Antonio. What was your initial reaction last night, if you were watching, if you stayed awake, when the clock hit 0 and Toronto was NBA champions?
My first reaction was good for them. Obviously, first NBA title in franchise history. So I was excited for them and that organization. And to beat a team like Golden State in what they've been able to do as far as this run, which is one of the best ever. The injuries are there. That's a part of it. But you can only take advantage of the situation put in front of you. And that's why me and Mike have had it at over the years. I've argued, and the Raptors prove this. There's more than one way to do something. And they proved you can go win an NBA title in a different way than some of the modern fans think the only way to do it is to tank. There are other ways to do things, anything in life. There's more than one way to do things. I think they were able to prove that. I think Kawhi Leonard proved that he's arguably the best player in the world. And I think it's good for the NBA to have a team that is typically not thought of as one of the powerhouses in the mix and actually winning an NBA title.
Yeah, I agree. The super team model, they definitely don't fit that mold, they being the Toronto Raptors, and a lot of role players that a lot of people have never even heard of stepped up on the biggest stage to help deliver them the first, title in franchise history. So good on them. I know some Sixers fans out there may not like me saying that, but hey, it is what it is. Tip your cap to them, and a fun NBA season, off season, I should say, ahead. So let's switch to Eagles, which is what the people
real
want.
Quick before we switch, let me just throw
please.
in. I think the Sixers can't get caught up, and I know that a lot of their fans, what we call this transitive property, that because they gave Toronto, and I put this in quotations, the toughest matchup, that they're closer than people think they are. I think a lot of fans think that way. I think the Sixers should not think that way because, the Milwaukee Bucks had them down 2-0, and I think they had to go to double overtime in Game 3.
Yep.
The Warriors obviously had significant injuries. That plays into it as well. So if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, you cannot play into that and assume we're that close, because I don't think they're that close.
It's a good point. And Elton Brand made some aggressive trades, as we all know. Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris. Now he has to, quote-unquote, deal with that and try and piece this team together this summer. And, you have the organization on record saying they're going for it. The window isn't that wide, and we're going for it now. So now you look at Toronto and how the Sixers played against them, and let's not hope it could get ugly. I think you bring up a lot of good points. So an interesting summer ahead for the front office and Elton Brand.
Yeah, certainly. And obviously it starts difficult decisions with Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. So it starts there. But even if you get them both back, even if you run it back, we've talked ad nauseum. I think you see Kawhi Leonard, somebody like that who's just at that elite level, never looks tired, plays 40 whatever minutes every night. I think Joel Embiid, you have to keep harping on him. He's got to get in better shape, fitness level, conditioning. And maybe that is the missing ingredient, because he's so talented that if he gets to that point, maybe he can drag lesser players with him, but he's got to get to that point.
You know, one connection that we can make with Toronto and the Sixers is it's a point that's being probably overblown today, how the Raptors managed Kawhi and his playing time and rest, the load management term we all love to use.
Yeah, I mean, the regular season it has shifted, and I think, ironically, it was San Antonio that probably shifted that as Tim Duncan got older, Tony Parker, in that great run. So we are in a different era. You go back to other, and guys would just play. I mean, you play because you play, because there's a game. I always talk about Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain played more minutes in one NBA season than there were minutes in an NBA season because of overtime games. He never left.
That's insane.
And look, I'm not advocating that because things have changed and these guys get paid so much money. So I'm fine in the regular season, but you got to figure it out. And when the playoffs start, you got to be ready to go 40-plus on any given night.
Yes, you do. And we'll see if Embiid is that guy that can do that for not just one playoff run, but multiple playoff runs. So let's transition over to the Eagles, Johnny. And you wrote an article yesterday on 97.3 ESPN. Lane Johnson puts a voice to the O-line. And we were talking about Kawhi and the Raptors and circle it into Eagles talk. And, you know, Lane Johnson has that famous reply, I guess you can call it famous, last week to DeMarkus Lawrence taking a shot at Carson, and Lane gave him the Kawhi laugh. So if you want to talk about Lane Johnson in that article you wrote for 97.3.
Yeah, I mean, well, Lane is one of the more important players on this team. I think if you go back to his his PED suspension and Doug's first year, I mean, we look at that year and so many people have thought of that season as a disappointment, and I know a lot of people even question whether Doug would make it through his second year, as laughable as that sounds today. And I always defended him, and I said, look, I thought he did a really, really good job as a coach dealing with some of the issues, starting with Sam Bradford getting traded right before the start of the regular season. Carson Wentz, people kind of forget, barely had a preseason because he broke his rib and was barely able to play. And all of a sudden, 8 days before the regular season, he's got to be the starter. And they were pretty competitive. And when Lane was on the field, they were more than competitive. And they really, really struggled when he wasn't. I think 2-8 during the 10-game suspension. When he's on the field, they generally win games. And it's weird to say that about an offensive lineman. And it's far more than that. It's the ultimate team sport. You can't even say that about quarterbacks. But it is what it is, and they tend to fall apart when he's not out there. And even last season, when he missed the game after Jacksonville, the team struggled. So he's turned into an all-pro player, and he's really kind of one of the heartbeats of this team in the way he handles his business and the fact that he does. He'll go on social media, far more talkative than the average offensive lineman. And that's part of the swagger this team has. And the fact that he'll go at DeMarkus Lawrence, who's one of the best pass rushers in this league. And then, oh, by the way, he's never gotten a sack against Lane Johnson. So he can not only talk, but he can back it up. And that's one of the reasons this team has so much confidence.
And DeMarkus Lawrence, he put that one on a tee for Lane Johnson.
Well, yeah, and from DeMarcus' standpoint, I mean, look, I say it all the time with players, and they don't pay attention. I mean, they don't kind of understand. they're caught up in their own world. And I'm not saying everybody, but Richard Sherman would be a perfect example when he was talking about, and we go through this every year, and we'll go through it again this year, when NBA free agency starts, and you start seeing these massive contracts. And everybody, every year, the same people. I say it's my time of year to teach math. They say, how can NBA players get paid so much and NFL players don't? Well, you're talking about 53 players on the regular season roster, 10 on the practice squad versus 15. So even when the salary cap pie is much bigger as it is, much larger it is in the NFL, when you have to split it up among 63 versus 15, well, that has an effect. And a lot of people can't seem to understand basic math. And in the case of Carson Wentz at the quarterback position, that's the going rate for quarterbacks in this league. So the fact that everyone looks at his contract, and if anything, it's team friendly. He actually got less than he should have. But I don't think the average fan understands that, and I don't think the average player understands that. So they see the big numbers, and their eyes pop out, and it's kind of weird to me.
You know, Scott Grayson joined me in studio for about the first hour and a half of the show, and him and I posed this question out to the listeners, and we had a little bit of a discussion that stemmed off of it. Who is more important right now from a leadership role for this upcoming season? Is it Carson Wentz or is it Doug Peterson?
Well, yeah, the coach and quarterback are obviously always married together. I think from a leadership standpoint, it's always the coach is more important. I mean, that's the guy who sort of stewards the ship, not only on the field but off the field. And that's the guy who's got to deal with the media and make sure everybody is together working for the same goal. So I think it's always the coach. On the field, though, I mean, the quarterback is the leader of the team. So they're both very important. But, yeah, I mean, the coach has to –
who has more of a challenging, maybe, to word it a little bit different? Like, Carson coming off last year and the injury, and then Doug's dealing with more personalities, I guess maybe more pressure.
Yeah,
after last year.
I think it's always more challenging for the head coach as far as leadership goes because he's in charge of all those different personalities. And if somebody, and we kind of talked about it yesterday on the show when you guys weren't here, this is the scariest part of the year for NFL coaches because guys aren't at the facility and they have 6 weeks off and they're left to their own devices and they have free time and a lot of money and a lot of them are young and immature. And that can create that cocktail where you see people getting in trouble. And I think every coach kind of holds his breath and doesn't want that phone call coming during the summer. They have to deal with all of those issues, and they get the questions about every single player, not just one player. So, I mean, Carson's got to deal with questions about the offense, if it's struggling and why it's struggling and why people aren't getting involved. But it's still far more limited than the kind of stuff a head coach has to deal with.
When you look to the front office, we all know Joe Douglas, and he departed. And you look over the past 24 hours, and you see all these promotions from within. And I would guess that's a good sign. And, one thing that a lot of us could rely on and say with confidence is how the Eagles organization is built from the top to the bottom. And I just want your thoughts on all of the promotions and how that impacts the team moving forward, how confident you are, with the quote-unquote new personnel in the front office in different roles. Similar, but nonetheless promotions, and now missing a big piece, which is Joe Douglas.
Yeah, I mean, I had tremendous respect. I have tremendous respect for Joe Douglas. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this organization handles it, and I think it's still to be determined. Andy Weidel, which was his right-hand man, gets promoted. They had to promote Andy, though, because if they didn't promote him, he'd be in New York with Joe. And the same with Ian Cunningham. Those are the two most likely guys that Joe wanted. In fact, he did want to go to New York with him. But if they give Andy Weidel the same power that Joe Douglas has, I think that's a positive step, but that's something you have to wait and see. From all indications I've gotten, the Eagles are going in a bit of a different direction, not a totally different direction, but they're sort of having two branches on the tree. And to simplify it, you have an analytics branch, which is Andrew Berry and Alec Hallaby, and then the scouting branch, which is going to be Andy Weidel and Ian Cunningham. I think the scouting branch, personally, is more important. I think that's what Joe did really, really well. If they start to lessen that impact because they think they're sort of counting cards and they're ahead of other teams in this league, I think it could blow up on them a little bit. But I think it remains to be seen how they move forward without Joe Douglas.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. You know, Grayson was saying that he feels good about it, and you know, you look at all of the best organizations around the league, Steelers, Patriots, Eagles, dare I say Giants, not anymore, maybe at one point, but they seem to be floundering. But, you know, the point is they develop their people from within, and this is the time now to see what this organization has. I think it's a big transition period.
Yeah, I think it is a bigger transition period than people realize. I mean, there are places, and Baltimore would be the most obvious example with Eric DeCosta, who stayed for a really long time, could have had a lot of general manager jobs as the right-hand man of Ozzie Newsome. And he stuck around, and it's a similar thing going on with George Patton in Minnesota, who keeps turning down interviews, turned down a Jets interview for the third time. He's turned down over 10 interviews over the past couple of years. So there are organizations that are able to keep their number two on the personnel side, and whether it's finagling titles or giving them more money. And I did not see the Eagles working hard to do that with Joe Douglas. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Now, maybe it's just from the fact that they know. I mean, Joe told me personally he wanted to be a general manager, so maybe they understood his ambition and didn't think they could do it and keep him. But all I'll say is I wish they would have tried a little bit harder. To me, it was like, well, Joe's going to go, so we have to start the succession plan.
Do you think it was more of them being
agree with it?
Right. I mean, do you think it was more of them just respecting Joe and understanding that that's what he wanted, so not really giving a pushback? Or
well, I'll just say this: when John DeFilippo had a chance to become the offensive coordinator of the New York Jets a couple of years ago, they blocked him because he was under contract. When Joe got a chance to interview with the Houston Texans to be their GM before they hired Brian Gaine, who they just fired, the Eagles blocked him because he was under contract. They blocked any ability for Andy Weidel and Ian Cunningham to go with Joe to New York with the Jets. So if they have the ability to stop people, and by the way, that's the way business is done. They have every right to do that. I'm not saying that's wrong of the Eagles. I'm just saying, no. The answer to that question is they're not just saying, we respect Joe Douglas, so let him go.
Yeah.
He could go because his contract ran out, rolled over. He probably worked out with them. Look, if I get a GM interview, I'm going to be able to take it. And that's how it went down. I think, when the Jets came in and lowballed him to start, he turned them down. And I think at that point, the Eagles should have came in and said, you know what, we'll give you a raise, we'll give you a bump in title, whatever that might be, let's keep you here. That never happened.
John McMullen joining us as he always does at 4 p.m. every day on the Sports Bash. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, any other news and notes that I didn't touch on that you wanted to get to?
Not really. I mean, minicamp obviously just wrapped up, and now we're in that 6-week dead period. So it's always an interesting time of the year because this is where you kind of look at the off-season roster. You've seen the players. You've seen how they look in the spring, and you kind of can get a feel for what the team is going to look like in September. And the Eagles are very deep, and they're a very good team. But I will say the one issue, and I mentioned this earlier in the week, there's no room for any more Carson Wentz's injuries. So as deep as they are, they're no longer deep at quarterback. It's Carson or bust.
And that's the last thing any of us need is Carson going down early. So let's have our fingers crossed.
I mean, that would be a disaster. And I also said that's, by the way, how most teams operate. I mean, most teams in this league don't have a backup quarterback they're confident in. The hope is if you need a guy for a game or two, maybe because of a sprained ankle, a minor injury, he can get you through it. If you got to play 12, 13 games with Nate Sudfeld or Cody Kessler or, God forbid, Clayton Thorson, that turns a Super Bowl contender into a non-playoff team really, really quickly.
Yeah, things would escalate pretty quickly there. So let's hope that doesn't happen. John McMullen joining us, as always, football at 4, Monday to Friday on the Sports Bash. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen or 97.3 ESPN Eagles Insider. John, as always, love talking to you, man. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too. Thanks, Ryan.